Hi, my name is Anna, and today I'm going to talk about fashion design in the world of teaching, where the current trend is the fashion for a tailor-made exam-focused lesson. Before we start, have a look at the clothes that you have on today. What motivated you to put these particular items of clothing together? There is a big chance that you were thinking about the occasion. So for me, this is a formal occasion, so I made a probably rather pathetic attempt to look rather smart. And the other thing that I took into consideration putting on my clothes today is the weather. So although I was tempted to put on my beautiful fur coat, I decided against taking into consideration the 30 degrees outside. And the last thing is the taste. So I sincerely hope that my earrings match the top and the necklace matches the dress. Now, what does it have to do with the exam? Well, preparing for an exam is like preparing clothes for a special occasion. The occasion in this particular question is the exam itself. The weather is the current need of the students. The students do not have to revise everything every time. They have certain needs at certain points of their preparation towards the exam. And the taste is the balanced development, the development of the skills that are not privileged in some way and some neglected, so that all the skills that the student needs at the exam are developed to the same extent, more or less to the same extent. So when we are dressing our students up for the exam, we need to take into consideration the exam requirements that we are going to have a quick look at, and we are going to have a look at the planning exam training sessions in terms of lessons that can take different angles depending on the requirement of the exam. That is focusing on reading, on listening, on grammar, and on writing. The exam requirements that are presented in the table boil down to a few basic skills. First of all, the listening skill. The listening skill is one of the major requirements for the exam, as well as reading, writing, and grammar. So what's missing? Speaking. Speaking, for now, is not a part of the exam, regrettably, but it doesn't mean that we don't have to teach it. We need to teach speaking because it's a part of everyday communication. It leads into the topic, it warms up the students at the beginning of the lesson, and it's a part of nearly every activity that the students are doing. So it is an integral part of any language course. But because this is also an exam preparation course, we need one more component, that is the exam strategies. Apart from knowing how to speak and what to say in English, they also need to know how to pass the exam. That is a totally different type of knowledge. So if we are looking at the exam preparation course, it requires two separate spheres of instruction. The first one is the language instruction, where we teach the students the language, the grammar and the vocabulary, equipping them with the tools that they can use later on during the exam. But the second part is the exam training. This is the part where we teach them how to pass the exam, how to use all the external knowledge they have that is extra-linguistic but helps them pass the exam well. Now, the exam is a difficult thing, and so no wonder that teachers tend to focus on the latter more than on the language instruction. But as Scrivener says, focusing on the exam training only may lead to burnout and will make our students lose their motivation to learn the language altogether. So how do we plan a training session that requires the students to use the language, motivates them to talk, and at the same time develops their skills of passing the exam in the future? Well, to design a good exam training curriculum, we need to have two components. The first one is the general course book, which gives our students the tools for their use in the future exam. That is the language, the vocabulary, the grammar, and the skills. And this is what we're doing during the practice on our regular classes. The second part is the part strictly devoted to exam training, when we are practicing the exam skills, where we are putting all the vocabulary that the students know, all the grammar knowledge and the ability to do certain skills into the framework of the exam exercises. Now, we can start doing that from the very beginning of their work in the school, or it can be a more intensive work during the last year of their practice. I usually decide with my students that we are going to do the general course book during our classes, and once a month we are going to devote a lesson to exam training only using the other book. Now, the exam training curriculum is slightly different from a general English lesson that is designed at preparing students for real-life communication. It's different in that it also needs to prepare the students for the one time and only occasion of the exam. So I would like you to imagine the exam preparation as a wardrobe full of clothes that we have put there through the teaching of vocabulary and grammar during the regular classes. So all the items of clothing in our wardrobe are the elements of language. So these are the vocabulary items and the grammar structures the students already have. Now we, the teachers, are the fashion designers who select from the wardrobe the activities and the knowledge the students need to have for the exam and put it in nice sets of attires that are suitable for the exam in exam-like activities. Now, every lesson plan may have different angles, may focus on different things, may focus on reading, on listening, or grammar and on writing. All of those skills required by the exam can be spun around one topic. Now, regardless of whatever the topic, whatever the angle is, we need to have a certain central pillar that is the lexical theme. For the reason of our presentation, let it be appearance. Now, this pillar consists of all the knowledge the students have already gained during their regular classes, the knowledge that they get through practice on their regular course book. Now, what we do with that on the exam training session is we're putting the vocabulary and the grammar knowledge into the skills of listening, grammar, reading and writing, obviously using the vocabulary learned beforehand and the speaking activity that is essential part of every lesson. Now, the preparing of clothes is the situation where we already have the items of clothing that we have learned and that we as teachers have taught the students during their regular classes. So they already know some adjectives for description. They know how to describe people, their appearance, they know the names of the clothes. They have been looking at exercises focused on listening. They have developed their speaking skills. They have been interacting, talking about appearance together during their general course. And now we are putting this knowledge into action. To do that, we need to revise and activate this vocabulary that they already know. So what we do is a test, teach, test technique, which requires the students to recall all the vocabulary that they can from the previous lessons, previous knowledge. In this particular topic, we are looking at the elements, adjectives that would describe appearance, describe clothing. So we can put them in a table of vocabulary sets in which they can put their own words that they already know. To that, we may add a little bit more sophisticated words. So to do that, I was inspired by a webpage of One Stop English that I'm sure everybody knows, but there are wonderful vocabulary activities that activate the language that students already know and perhaps add a few items that might be new, that are at a more advanced level, it would be impressive at the exam. So what we would do is we'd decide with the students to select a few elements from the table, one element from each section, and then put them together to form a description of an item of clothing. So at the end, we may end up with a sentence like a chic floral crimson straw dress that could be nicely illustrated by a drawing that the students can make. Now, this is a perfect opportunity to introduce the idea of the order of adjectives, which is typically kind of confusing for the students. So I decided to tell my students that the first letters of the categories make some sort of a word that could more or less be pronounced as osacommon. And then the first letters stand for the different categories. So we have opinion, size, age, color, origin, material, usage, and noun. Now, thanks to this strategy, if they don't remember the right order of the adjectives, they may jot down the first letters on the margin of their test and then try to recall the order through the mnemonic. The natural environment of the students is the internet. So this is something that motivates them to practice. We can use that motivation to allow them more practice with the exercises that are online, available online, and that make the students more interested in revising vocabulary. They might be drag and drop exercises or crosswords or word searches that are available on the internet and that make the activity more appealing to the students. Now, we can turn our focus of an exam lesson towards reading. Now, it will not come as a surprise to you to say that this type of exercise requires the students to find keywords. But what's a keyword? Keyword is a very vague term, and it's very difficult for the students to understand the idea of what a keyword is. Now, we could try and be more specific and tell the students to underline in the text adjectives that relate to opinions and the adjectives that describe clothes. Now, if they do that, they would come up with something like this. And in this way, we can ask the students now to find in the text words that are synonyms. And the synonymous expressions that can be found in two parts of the task are very likely to form the right answer for the exam. Now, to teach the students how to look for keywords for the exam, we can also use authentic materials. HarperCollins provides a browser of books, unabridged full versions, where the students can go and have a look at a book, at any page of the book, and we can come up with activities. For example, asking the students to look for a given word in the text, like what is the name of the god of destiny, which is here. Okay, the students looking at the real authentic materials can get more motivated to learn how to find the keywords in the text. And also, because the books are of their own choice, they might be more motivated to learn the language in general. The lesson can also focus on listening. Listening is a very complex skill. It requires the listener to determine the setting, the interpersonal relation between the speakers, the topic of the conversation, to form a hypothesis, to predict, and to make inferences about the discussion. Now, we may help our students by making those elements of listening more explicit to them. So if we have a look at the short conversation between Gus and Sue, where Gus says, "It doesn't have a mouse, does it?" And Sue replies, "No, not at that price." On the basis of this very short conversation, we may establish the setting. Where are the speakers? Well, it's probably a shop because it's a business transaction situation. So what is the interpersonal relation between the speakers? Well, they are probably a buyer and seller. We can decide what the topic of the conversation is, which is probably a business transaction. We may form a hypothesis. So why are those people talking? They're talking because Gus wants to buy something that Sue wants to sell. And we can also form a prediction. So what do they mean? If you thought this, you're probably right. And we also can infer certain information that is hidden in this interaction. That is, what's the hidden message is that Sue says, "Not at that price," means that that price must be a low one. Now, in a real exam, we can also depend on the same elements of listening. So before we even listen to the task, we look at the questions and at the answers. Now, this text is about Vicky and Ted, who are talking about a shirt. Now, what we can do here is also establish a setting. Now, because they're talking about a shirt, they're probably in a shop. Or if they are not, they are definitely talking about a situation referring to the buying element. We can also establish the interpersonal relation between those people speaking. Because Vicky bought the shirt for Ted, they must be a couple or a mother and son relationship. We can establish the topic. They are talking about a shirt they bought. And we can form a hypothesis. Because there are many negative verbs in the answers and in the questions, we may guess that Ted doesn't like the shirt. And finally, we can predict that what is going to happen, or what Ted wants Vicky to do, is to bring the shirt back to the shop. Our lesson can also focus on grammar. Now, English grammar is quite difficult. And this is quite visible in all the mistakes that we can see everywhere on signs and on products and labels, where the mistakes refer to the wrong use of tense, like it's dangerous to smoke while you are becoming pregnant, or caution, blade extremely sharp, keep out of children, or it was so exciting to watch the cheerleaders throw up high into the air, which is an example of a real work from a student's production. So the grammar at this level that we are looking at the exam is more communicative than formal. So the exercises consider the use of grammar in a real life communication situation. So in the situation in which the question and answer are motivated by the context, what we can do to help our students do this task well is make them realize that the initial question, the prompt, creates the context for the answer. So in the question number 5, for example, in here we have the question, how hot is here in summer? And obviously the answer to this question is C, so it's about 30 degrees. But we can ask the students to make a context, a prompt question that would match the other two answers. So we can ask the students to come up with the question that could be answered, it's hot here in the summer, for example, what's the weather like here in summer? And then the answer A would be a perfect answer. So not only do we concentrate on the right answer to the question given, but we are also analyzing the other answers and trying to modify the context to make those other answers fit the new context. And this way we are trying to make the students aware of how context modifies the linguistic reactions. One of the most important skills concerning grammar during the exam is the ability to predict. Now, when we have a task like this, in which we have to choose the right grammatical item to fit the gap in the context, what we need to do is to guess what item fits the gap. Now, we can have a look at the answers and try to match each of the answers with the gap, but we could try to look at the task as if there were no hints given first. This is very similar to the situation that we probably all know, that is the quiz show of Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. In this quiz show, it very often happens that the person who runs the show asks the contestant to answer the question before the answers occur. So the question flashes on the screen and the person who runs the show asks, do you know the answer? And just to be safe, the contestant says, I'm not sure, maybe we'll just look at the answers first, even though he probably already has certain predictions about the correct answer. And all he does after the answers appear is match his answer that he thought of first with the ones that appear on the screen and see whether he can find the one that he was thinking about, which would in this case be this one. Now, we can do the same thing with the exam task. So we can show the students the task without the answers and ask the students to try and guess what fits into the gaps before they even look at the answers. Now, if we do that, it will activate the students' active grammar in their lexicons, and they can come up with ideas. They might not certainly be right, but if they are not, it will tell us something about their gaps in knowledge in terms of grammar. So if we have a look at the answers, they refer to certain areas of grammar. So they are quantifiers, articles, tenses, and this is a very good moment to notice the problems that the students have. So if the students have problems with articles or with quantifiers, we can refer them to a separate section in the book or in a grammar reference book where they can practice this particular thing. They don't have to practice everything every time if their understanding, their grasp of tenses is good enough, but their articles are not that well developed. They should focus on practicing this part of grammar and not the other. Now, the last skill that is required by the exam is writing. Now, our lesson, our exam preparation lesson, can also focus on this skill. Now, writing at this level is typically the one of an informal letter. And this informal letter is used in all different tasks during the test, considering grammar or reading, because this is the input text, the type of text that students read and the type of text that students work on in terms of grammar. Now, what we can do with that is take the existing activity that was meant for practicing grammar, like this one, and try to ask students to try and decompose the initial question for writing. So what was the question that the writer of this email might have answered in terms of the exam? So the question could have been this one for this particular task. Then we might ask the students to analyze the letter the other way around, so trying to decompose the ready-made letter into the bullet points that they will normally have to cover during their writing task at the exam. So these are the 3 bullet points that the person writing the email would have to cover while writing this particular email. And we may underline the sentences that give this particular information and then transform the sentences into the task requirement to make the students realize the mechanics of forming the task. Now, because I'm a great fan of authentic materials and authentic use of the language, I think that writing only makes sense if someone really wants to read it and that someone wants to reply to the writing of an informal letter that the students are willing to do. So at the beginning of the year, consider running a project in which your students will find for themselves a partner to correspond with from a different country in English. The students can find 10 friends all over the world on safe websites, and once they find a friend, we may decide to form a task that is an exam task of writing, in which we will give them the task and the bullet points that they need to cover while writing their initial email. And then they may send this email to the chosen person and wait for the answer. Now, typically, my students show me the first letter they write for me to correct their spelling mistakes or any other grammar problems that they might have with the letter. But I never come to see the answers, and I never come to see the other letters they write. They become secret because they're real-life communication, a real exchange of thought between 2 people from 2 different countries. And this incredibly increases their motivation to learn the language and to write something in English, because somebody wants to read it and is not interested in the mistakes that they make, but in the content that they want to convey to the other person. Now, I'm also a big fan of Idea Seekers, which is a platform game. And this is a game in which students can come and meet other students from all over the world. They can read texts, authentic texts that are in the fields of science, geography, maths, chemistry. There are also areas for teachers. Teachers can start projects and their own teams on the platform, and the students can communicate and exchange experience also in the area of subject knowledge, other subject knowledge than English, but in the language. So if we want to prepare the students for the exam, what we need to do is to activate their existing knowledge, the knowledge that we have implemented in them during their regular courses, during the work with a general English course book that is aimed at increasing the repertoire of vocabulary and grammar structures in the language. And we need also to add a little bit of practice in the exam skills and give them a final touch of the use of the language, of the real live language. So what we need to do is to have materials that would refer to all parts of their language preparation for the exam and for real life. So to prepare our students for the exam, we need to dress them in certain skills. Now, first of all, we need to put on them the language skills. And also, we need to equip them with exam strategies. And dressed like that, if we do our job well as designers, our students will not fall, and we will experience full success, which I wish to you, to myself, and to all our students in the future. Thank you.